Hi, and welcome to another podcast of Crossing Borders. Today we have Matt Barnette with HID with us. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining. Why don't you give everyone, introduce yourself and a background of HID and the products that you represent?
Sure. My name again, Matt Barnette. Hard to believe I'm entering my 30th year of being in the security industry. Started out of college with a degree in economics, working for a small system integrator in the San Francisco Bay Area, and really learned the industry from the integrator side of the business. That company was purchased by Sensormatic, one of the names from the past, and worked on the product side and manufacturing side at Sensormatic, and have basically been on the product side of the electronic security market ever since. So you know you're getting old when I just received an email from a former colleague and boss that is retiring at the end of this year. Hard to believe we're at that stage, but it's been great working in this industry. At HID, it was part of the Mercury acquisition. We just celebrated the 3rd year anniversary of the acquisition of Mercury, based in Long Beach, California. Mercury, if you're not familiar, is an access control panel and controller manufacturer that was founded here in the Long Beach area back in 1991 by a few engineers that came from the industry. Started the concept of having a open access control panel that could be sold through OEMs and that would deliver the software, the user interface. That model has now resonated well in the marketplace, and Mercury has grown substantially over that period of time. So many long-term OEM relationships with companies like Linnell S2 and Genetec, Avigilon, Honeywell, to name a few. So it's been interesting transition here, working for Mercury and now part of HID Global.
Great. Yeah, some really big names in the industry, which leads into, crossing borders. So I know initially Mercury was selling just domestically, and it's before all of these big access control manufacturers became global. Why don't you kind of talk about how you support, U.S. based and Canadian based access control manufacturers with your panels outside of the U.S., because they still need support, even though you're selling to them directly, and then they're having to ship from their manufacturing sites, because that's how you go to market. But how are you supporting them and in all these different regions with regulations and things that happen outside of the U.S.?
Yes, that's a great question. So traditionally, Mercury sold through the OEMs, primarily in North America, and relied on them to handle global distribution. And that worked out really well for a long period of time. Had relationships with many of the bigger ones that had that footprint or grew that footprint globally. Mercury did have did ship product internationally and support other OEMs, but it was a smaller portion of the portfolio. Part of the advantageous being associated with HID is that HID does have a global footprint. So over the last few years, really setting up distribution through the HID distribution centers around the globe, so that we can support and have the product more in region. So that's been a project for the last few years, setting up those locations. And adding resources. So the Mercury team, the traditional Mercury team, now part of HID, has added resources. So we have people positioned around the world to support the product from both the business development as well as what we call developer support. So we are able to handle. We've been onboarding other OEMs. So Mercury, the Mercury brand under HID is one of the few products that in HID packs that is only sold through OEMs, and we, because they're adding value to the product by providing that software layer that user interface and the work and engineering that goes into that. That's the way it goes to market. So those OEMs, as you mentioned, the certifications. So traditionally, in the Mercury days, it was really incumbent upon the OEMs to provide those certifications depending on the countries they were doing business. That that philosophy, if you will, has had to change now as part of HID. We have a compliance team within HID that does the certifications for the product, and put together the rationale and the business case to get those certifications done for different countries around the world. So we're adding certs depending on where our partners are going or want to have the ability to resell the product. So there's quite a bit of work that goes into that. Usually some testing, but a lot of paperwork and of course some money attached to that paperwork to get those logos for certifications in different countries around the world.
Exactly. This is the same conversation whether you're at a previous trade show that none of us go to anymore, but when you would be at a trade show, you'd be talking to people about, have you heard about this new certification, and keeping up with it. And like you said, it's paperwork and time, and different countries do things different ways. But I mean, at the end of the day, every access control system is similar enough that the hardware doesn't have to be changed. Is that correct?
By and large, the hardware does not change, and really the firmware on the hardware doesn't change. It's just a matter of going through the proper exercises to get those certifications. So with UL and CE testing, it's I think that's one of the gold standards. So if we can pass those, then we usually don't have issues bringing the product into different countries, other than going through the proper legal channels to get those certs. Depending on the country that we're shipping to.
And since Mercury is now part of HID, that's a huge advantage because HID has people locally on the ground, especially all around Europe and the Middle East. So by being part of HID and us Alloy, that makes it even easier for Mercury, not having to have your own people. It's just more of an education that you're dealing with, educating them on the panels, and you're going to market different probably.
Right. So not only having the corporate resources on the compliance team, that team of people that are used to doing this for other HID products, and how they do business in these different countries. There's a logistics component of that as well that needs to be considered, and tax implications. But having the local representation to be able to talk about the HID strategy is certainly beneficial from a global perspective, for sure.
So as Mercury's expanding more to develop relationships with more OEMs in Europe, I mean, those are people that you've had probably designated to have to go and talk to them. And they're probably Europeans that are doing that, but of course you're supporting them. And I mean, do you see any challenges with getting European OEMs on board to be a Mercury customer?
Yeah, so so just to be clear, we have really two controller lines at HID currently. So the Mercury brand and what was released earlier this year is the Aero product line, which is based on a Mercury design and really meant for the SMB type of space. So I don't think it's any different. A lot of companies around the world have in the access control business probably grew up by creating their own panel at one time or another. And I think you were the one who told me that there's over 2,000 different access control panels, different manufacturers of access control panels around the world, and that may be a low number. But the reality is, the requirements, the cybersecurity issues. I think a lot of manufacturers are starting to come to terms with the fact that, it's easy to create the product once, but you have to constantly keep these things updated. You're running into chip obsolescence issues. The companies that make these chips are discontinuing them at a faster rate than they used to 10, 15 years ago. So you're constantly having to re-engineer, redesign. And then when you enter the cybersecurity issues, you're constantly having to upgrade the firmware on the panels, adding encryption and newer versions of encryption. And so it's not a one and done scenario. And I think a lot of manufacturers that have made their own products over a period of time have come to terms with the fact that that's a lot of engineering that has to continuously go into the products. And at the end of the day, what differentiates them in their market is not usually the hardware, but the software interface and the features that they provide through software. And so I think we've been successful in talking to these manufacturers around the globe now. And it's not a quick process, but that traditionally it's been a 12 to 18 to 24-month process of working with OEMs, talking to them about where they want to go, and showing them the product, letting them do some evaluations, and then in a lot of cases being successful in having them transition from perhaps their own proprietary hardware platform that's worked well for them over time, but again with limited R&D budgets. Do they want to spend their time engineering new hardware and keeping that hardware up to date with all of the changing standards, or working with a company like HID that can provide them that platform so they can focus their efforts in other places?
I totally agree. It's interesting how proprietary sometimes in our industry is turned into a dirty word, because it's all about the software. And I mean, the hardware, like you said, it's so expensive for people to keep up with. And what makes one access control different from the other? That's something that's very unique, and it's definitely making a change in the market, I think.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, when we look at some of the platforms that are coming to market now on the software side, a lot of focus on cloud,
Mhm.
and really remarkable products. And the difficulty, again, companies that have been doing this for a while on the software side, is how to continuously engineer that product to not only satisfy their user base, which, as you know, is always demanding features and updates, but then also being forward facing and being able to bring to market new solutions that right now there's certainly, and I think this pandemic has accelerated the adoption of more cloud centric solutions. People don't want to have an infrastructure in an office. They want to be able to access their product from anywhere. And certainly it's helped, I think, accelerate the adoption of cloud. So we're certainly seeing more of our customers and more people coming to market with those solutions. And then the hardware is only a small portion of that. So the platform has been cloud centric for a long time, and now the industry is starting to really focus a lot of attention on the user interface, the software to enable that ability through the cloud.
Yeah, I agree. What challenges and differences have you seen, not just working at HID, but even in your past lives, of doing business in the US versus Europe and the Middle East? Because I know you've been worked in EMEA for years.
Yeah, there's numerous issues you run into, everything from time zone challenges to currency issues, the logistics of getting products to these places, and then of course there are different tax implications in different areas. So I think by and large, if the product has a good reputation and you have a brand like HID, it certainly helps remove some of the obstacles. But still there's a lot to do in order to get the local support and the momentum behind the adoption of products in different geographies. There are some times when you come into, people want to have features that are really more native to that country or that area, and making sure that you can support those features. And sometimes the business case just isn't there. There's not enough volume of business to make sense to re-engineer or add functions or features to a product to support those areas. That seems to be happening less and less when you have a more mature product in the market. But certainly there are times when we have to say, we're not going to re-spin the board to add cost in order to meet a requirement for a very specific market. And those are business decisions you just have to make.
Definitely. And there are some specifics like that. With living in the Nordics, there's some that are specific just to Sweden. And that's why manufacturers from Sweden do so well, because they can do that, and other people, it's just not worth it. I mean, it's a country of less than 10 million people. So absolutely. Any other insight, any other input or information you would like people to know about doing business from the US into Europe that you've seen?
I think by and large, because the product is designed in the U.S., our center of excellence for the controller business is still in Long Beach, California. It seems like in some regions that's a positive, and so we try to take advantage of that where we can. But again, it depends on the country and the requirements. It's there's no one size fits all solution for these things, but we chip away and we try to make inroads where we can. Certainly, what we're seeing in the marketplace, these products all used to be in silos, from the readers, the panels, the software, and the different ancillary devices that were connected, including the power supplies. 10 years ago, there wasn't much thought put into how do all these parts and pieces interact with each other. And now we really see customers coming and asking for a more integrated solution. So where we see the market going, the ability from a head-end software, whether that's in the cloud or on-premise solution, not only being able to manage your access control, card holders, your database, be able to manage alarms and events, but also be able to change not only the settings in the panel, but also all the way down to the card reader, being able to manage the settings that are in the reader. I think a lot of people don't realize how sophisticated these readers have become over time, where they can read multiple card technologies. They have encryption keys in them that need to match between the reader and the panel in order to validate that card is not only a valid card in the access control database, but also that it's the proper encryption between the reader and the panel. So there's a lot of sophistication that have been built into these products over time. And what's perhaps been lagging in the access control market is the ability to manage these things holistically from a head end, no matter where you are in the world, be able to check the firmware version of the panels of the readers, be able to modify, update the firmware, be able to change settings, not only again in the panels, but all the way down to the reader. So as an example, if a customer is moving from a prox technology for their card holders and getting off of that insecure prox onto a more secure solution like the HID CIOS technology, you may have a transition time there. And at some point when all of those prox cards have been taken out of the population, you can turn that functionality off in the card reader. And we want to be able to provide that functionality from a web interface so that you can do that as a system administrator from anywhere in the world. So we're seeing these more end-to-end solutions coming to market, technologies like OSDP in the reader side, enabling that bidirectional communication. So we're seeing that after been in the market for 10 or 12 years now, OSDP finally getting a lot of momentum in the marketplace. So customers coming to us and asking, about the validity of OSDP and the move much more now than they were 2 years ago. So we're seeing a big change in the marketplace when it comes to that. And the encryption capabilities, really wanting to have a cyber secure end-to-end encrypted solution. So from the card to the reader to the panel, and the panel to the head end, whether that's again an on-premise solution or a cloud-based solution, customers are coming and saying they want to make sure that these systems are not going to be easily hacked. And so the end users have certainly become more educated over time. They probably had a few rounds with access control products through their their experience and are educating themselves more when they come to the table. So we're certainly being asked a lot more in-depth questions now than we were 5 or 10 years ago.
That's great because, like you said, the technology's been there. People just haven't used it. People have been lazy, and end users have definitely become more educated over the years. They're not just relying on the system integrator to tell them this is what you need.
Yeah, it's been a big change that the system integrators who used to be the ones to really dictate product, and I think they still do in a lot of cases, but certainly in the middle to enterprise space, customers, they're coming and saying, this is what we want, or this is what we're looking for, and not just taking the de facto of whatever the system integrator wants to sell because it's easy for them or is what they're used to. I think the end users are now demanding more. And so my advice is, you know, educate yourself if you're an end user, call the manufacturers and ask questions. I think there's certainly a lot more interaction now between end users and manufacturers, whereas, you know, traditionally the manufacturers kind of wanted to be behind the curtain, and now the customers are demanding to have that dialogue. They don't necessarily buy direct from the manufacturers, meaning like companies like HID, but they want to have those questions answered, right?
Absolutely. I've definitely seen that. It was probably more common in the Middle East, but it's becoming much more common around the world now for that.
Exactly.
Well, Matt, thank you. This has been excellent information, and stay safe out there.
Always great to catch up, Stephanie. Thank you for your time.